quite a society. It beats our understanding that donors see how and where this money goes, but you continue to give those few halves and add them more. It's not fair. Once this nation gets into trouble, I am sure you will leave the country and leave it worse. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not. Conclusively, young people out there of my generation, it's high time we took leadership, not tomorrow, because the tomorrow they have promised us never comes. Our tomorrow is today. We call upon you, ladies and gentlemen, to mobilize, organize, participate in entire electoral processes. I can assure you we can surprise them with our numbers. Because we have the numbers, and numbers matter in this entire game. It is so bad of us to continue behaving as minorities when we are the majority. That young people at 20s, they look 70s because of the trenches onto their foreheads caused by the stress that they have. If I always talk about the suffering of young people, it will take a whole year. Let us apply brains, creativity, strength, skills in our numbers for God and my country.
Give him another round of applause. And let us listen from another host organization, Action Aid Uganda. Another round of applause as we welcome him on the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, participants in this symposium in your respective capacities. My name is Xavier Joy. I work with Action Aid Uganda as country director. I am pleased to stand before you here to address you briefly in my opening remark as one of the organizations that put together this national symposium on money in electoral politics on the theme Commercialized Electoral Processes as a Barrier to Democratic Dispensation in Africa. As Action Aid, we are proud to associate with the Alliance for Finance Monitoring and the Alternative, together with the different development partners that finance our organizations in putting together this symposium. For those who do not know, Action Aid is a movement of people working for a just and sustainable world. We believe that to achieve social justice, gender equality, and poverty eradication, we work directly with people living in extreme poverty and exclusion, their communities, their own organizations, social movements, and their supporters. That's what, as Action Aid, we focus on. But I just want to place this symposium directly in our mandate as an organization. Currently, we're implementing a country strategy. One of the strategic priority areas focuses directly on people's actions for democratic governance, especially the strategic objective 3 focuses on strengthening citizens' actions to deepen democracy and hold state, corporations, and political leaders accountable for social justice. Especially, we really focus on the participation of citizens and their influence on key governance processes, such as elections, planning and budgeting, and institutional and political reforms. To the event that has brought us this morning, we think that as Action Aid, citizens need to engage in the conversations about the burgeoning involvement of money in our electoral process. As my colleague Henry did say earlier, that is a conversation that all of us need to confront candidly and heads-on. We also strive to support a vibrant, citizen-led anti-corruption movement as Action Aid, because we think that is what will champion the cause for greater transparency and accountability in the use of public funds. I want to quote a one-time US president. He said, I quote, "Elections belong to the people. It is their decision. If they decide to turn their back on the fire and burn their behinds, and then they will just have to sit on their blisters." Fellow participants, we think that as citizens, as people whose decision is critical in electoral processes, we need to engage more than we've been doing in the process of the conversations, the debate around the use and overuse of money in electoral politics. As said by my colleagues earlier, money in politics is unavoidable. We are not debating that. However, we think that as candidates who need money in political activities, as political leaders, or those who aspire to political leadership, they are citizens of this country an explanation of what their source of campaign funds are and how they intend to recover, especially the overspending of money in their campaigns once they get those seats. And therefore, they need to be accountable to the citizens. There is a relationship between financing campaigns and corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, if we are to be on top of the anti-corruption fight, we need to start having the conversations around campaign financing at the forefront, so that when we elect leaders, those leaders are able to champion that fight when their path and trail to political office is straight and is transparent. I want to end my remarks by just throwing one challenge at political leaders who are in this room. And I see a few political party leaders here. I'm a Ugandan of voting age, and I've participated in all political elections since I turned 18. However, to date, I have not been approached by any one political leader to join them and pay their membership fee. Whether it's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 50,000, I haven't been approached. So in my mind, I wonder where political parties get their funding to run their affairs from. Don't get me wrong, I'm not soliciting for membership in your political organizations. I'm just asking a question: isn't it in order for your aspirations to rule in different capacities in this country, to engage with citizens, and citizens who may have the means to finance your political organizations. So as we sit here and reflect and debate this topic, let's be candid and open up about these issues that affect all of us. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming, and on behalf of ActionAid and my colleagues in Alliance for Finance Monitoring and Alternative, we are excited to receive you here for this debate. And I want to take this moment now to hand over to Patrick Kamara. I'm not seeing our keynote speaker here. Otherwise, it's a moment for him to take over and talk to us.
Another round of applause to Javier. I think all of us are excited to listen to our guest speaker. Just a few things. Ugandans have been writing and Ugandans have been singing. And when he was talking here, I remembered a few things and a few books I've read. And what are Ugandans writing about? You find a book like Betrayed by My Leader. You find a book like Is It the Correct Path? And what are Ugandans listening to? You hear music like Tuli Kubun Kenke, like We Are on the Tenterhooks. You hear music like Bako, They Are Tired. And recently I've heard a song called We're Going to Wear the Crown. Perhaps that is giving hope, but that is what they are writing about. So ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker is a Pan-Africanist. He's a Kenyan law professor and a former director of Anti-Corruption Commission in his country. He has spoken at different forums across this continent and beyond. He's inspirational. We are so honored to have him and speak to us this morning. Many of us are proud of him. With a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me, Professor PLO Lumumba. Let's stand up and receive Professor PLO Lumumba.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me say how happy I am to be in your presence this morning. I do not claim to be an authority on the subject that I've been requested to speak on and about, but I have thoughts to share with you, which thoughts I believe will be cross-fertilized by the thoughts of others during the panel discussion. But let me say at the very outset that the question of the commercialization of politics is one that is evergreen, particularly since the advent of multi-party politics in Africa. If you allow me a little latitude, prior to the re-emergence of multi-party politics in 1989, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, which was the landmark historical event, we sometimes forget that many African countries did actually have many political parties at the advent of our regaining independence. And I use the word regaining our independence deliberately, because sometimes we behave as if we were not independent at all. and that we acquired our independence through the process of decolonization. The truth as we know it, prior to the advent of the European powers in the 18th and 19th centuries, Africa and Africans were independent. And then very harshly, courtesy of the history that we are all aware about, the European powers congregated in Berlin in 1884 and arbitrarily and harshly created different countries which we now claim to be citizens of. I was listening to a speech yesterday where somebody was saying, rather melodramatically, that a day before the conference in Berlin, two couples sleeping on one bed woke up the following day only to discover that the husband was a Ugandan and the wife was a Kenyan. The whole idea of that dramatization was to demonstrate how arbitrary the process of the partition of Africa was. We also know, and one need not belabor the issue, that no sooner had the process of colonization started than Africans started agitating for independence. And the struggle for independence was attended by violence in a number of African countries, and ultimately we regained our independence. On the eastern coast of Africa, you will remember that there were efforts even in those early days, particularly through Tanzania's Julius Kambarage Nyerere, to delay Tanzania's independence so that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, or Tanganyika as it was then, could regain independence as one country. But the leaders of Kenya, being Jomo Kenyatta and your own Apollo Milton Obote, thought otherwise. The net effect is that we regained our independence as separate African countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. And you will remember that there was multi-party politics. And it's also instructive in those early days, whether we want to deny it or not, that those who are in the forefront of the struggle for independence at that time, notwithstanding that they committed certain mistakes thereafter, were animated by the desire to restore the dignity of the people. And one can argue here in Uganda, for example, that UPC or DP, which were the main political parties at that time, did represent certain clear ideological orientations. One can also say that in Kenya at that time, the Kenya African National Union and the Kenya Democratic Union did represent some clear ideological orientation. And I'm not using the word ideology in the classical sense to mean Marxism or Leninism or those other isms. I'm talking about using ideology loosely to refer to clarity on what independence meant and would mean for the people. That was also true in Tanzania through then Tanganyika African National Union. One can therefore say that in those early days, the leaders were animated by the desire to move their countries in the right direction and to restore the people's dignity. One need only look at the very casual works of some of the leaders at that time across the continent of Africa. Whether you are looking at the casual or the more serious works of Julius Nyerere, or looking and reading the more casual works of people like Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau, or you are reading the more casual works of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, or the more casual works of Kwame Nkrumah. And I'm using casual rather than serious to demonstrate that even when they were casual, they were committed to certain ideals, and that these ideals had one aim. So that when the leaders met in the month of May in 1963 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and one need only read the 32 speeches that were delivered by the 32 delegations led by either heads of states or heads of government or their representatives and the national movement, then to realize that there was clarity in the minds of Africans of the day. But there is one speech that stood out on that day, the speech of Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. He was as animated, as agitated as he ought to have been in exhorting the leaders of the day that the safety of the African continent not only required but demanded on that day that Africa should move towards unity. And he reminded the people that the colonial project was still alive and well, and that it would come camouflaged as neo-colonialism. And he reminded the leaders that if they did not unite, the erstwhile colonial powers would come in a different way. Whether those colonial powers were France, or the United Kingdom, or Belgium, or Spain, or Portugal, they would come. Kwame Nkrumah may not have been a prophet, but his words were prophetic. Kwame Nkrumah may not have had the foresight of a Jewish prophet, but when one looks at Africa today, one can see very clearly that the neo-colonial project is alive and well, despite our protestation to the contrary. If you go to the so-called Francophone, and let me pause for a moment and remind us that we are the only continent in the world which Western Europe, and when I talk about Western Europe, I'm talking about the conceptual West. The conceptual West extends beyond the continent of Europe, refers to us as Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa. So Uganda is Anglophone. Notwithstanding that not more than 30% speak English, you are Anglophone. In Cote d'Ivoire is Francophone. Notwithstanding that not more than 30% can speak French. Nigeria is Anglophone, notwithstanding that there are over 500 local languages. Nigeria is Anglophone. Angola is Lusophone, and so is Mozambique. That is where we find ourselves. One may ask, what has that to do with the subject that I've been invited to speak about, the commercialization of politics? It has everything to do with it. Because if we don't have that sense of history, we cannot appreciate why politics has changed its face over the years. So we regained our independence, but no sooner had we settled in our independence than we started seeing the disruption of that independence. As early as 1961, the man for whom I am named, Patrice Emery Lumumba, barely 9 months in office, was removed from power, and the Democratic Republic of Congo has never been the same again. Barely 1 year in office, Togo's Sylvanus Olympia was removed. A few years into office, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah was uprooted. A few years in office, Nigeria's Nnamdi Azikiwe was eliminated. And when you look at some of these removals and or elimination, they were clearly choreographed. When the leaders were careful to ensure that they were moving to liberate their people, it is now common knowledge that Western agencies orchestrated their removal from office. They invaded our barracks. And at one time it was being said of many African countries that coups were as frequent as breakfast. But the truth and the unfortunate thing that in many of those countries, even breakfast was not that frequent. So that we were never able to settle down. Then, of course, we had leaders who, upon us